Welcome to Motor Development and Skills Learning, Chapter 2. Let's pull up the slideshow and we'll get started. Theoretical perspectives in motor development. All right, so really quick before we get into theories, and I want you to realize this for every science course that you're going to take, whether with me or anybody else. When you hear the word theory, now a lot of times there are some really good theories that are backed by lots and lots of evidence. But again, the reason something's a theory and not a law is because we can't prove it beyond, we can't prove it 100%. There's some type of either doubt or some informational gap, or there's alternate theories that also prove to be have some merit. Okay. And again, I'm not saying that because the theories that we're about to go over, like there's some in here that like I completely disagree with or anything like that. I'm just throwing this since we have this actually in the title, is that I want you guys to always scrutinize theories. Okay, whether, no matter what the theory is, no matter if it's something that's been basically preached from a scientific standpoint as this is the only reasonable theory to go with. Again, if they haven't moved it from theory to law, always understand that there is some gap. Now, again, we use the best theories that we got out there as best we can in science. And again, some of these theories change over time because as we get better with our technological advances and we're able to see things that we have not seen before, it does change our scientific knowledge. Okay, and so just because you're learning this today doesn't mean 5 years, 10 years from now, there's, if you open another motor learning text, or, if you're in a biology class or chemistry class, some things won't change because they will, because we get better with those things. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Just take this as that this is what the authors in this particular book feel are some of the more important theories to understand in motor development, and that's all it is, right? And you as practitioners and researchers need to look through all the evidence that's out there and figure out if some of these theories really hold up, or there's some alternative theories that you feel are worth exploring that might work better. Okay. All right, so motor development, what happens? So this is showing you two twins, and again, they're starting off with basically, like identical DNA, right? But over time, you will find sometimes that there's a lot of similarities between twins, and there will be some differences. You may have one that's more athletic. You may have one who's better musically, another one that's better mathematically, another one that's better, right? And again, these developments happen according to, just because their DNA is similar doesn't mean that their interests are similar, doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to learn things the same way, even though their minds work different, right? And so again, you can have twins that have a lot of similarities in the way they walk, the way they speak, the way they, and again, that's a mixture of, yes, they do have very similar DNA, but again, they have the same parents, they may have the same friends, they may have the same, so or they may have older siblings or something that taught that they mimicked, and so on and so forth. And so again, sometimes you see they're very similar, and sometimes you see they're very different even though they look the same, right? And again, that's because life experience, right? Development happens. All right, so we'll talk about the maturation perspective, information processing perspective, and ecological perspectives. All right. So again, we talked a bit about this yesterday, but motor development driven by maturation of systems, right? So this has to do with like your CNS system and how it works within you. And again, your central nervous system is going to mature on its own, but at the same time, there's going to, it says minimal influence of environment. But again, there's going to be some give and take with your environment. It just is what it is, right? And so there's going to be some influence, in how your system develops. And again, you know, this is up. Again, this is actually one of those ones that's up to debate. There's some folks that feel that there's a lot of influence on the environment when it comes to your central nervous system, how it develops at different times, right? Characteristics of motor development, qualitative and discontinuous, which we'll talk about. So history of maturational perspective started in 1930s, suggested invariable genetically determined sequence of development. Individuals can have unique timing. And research, they did co-twin control strategy studies. McGraw in 1935 associated motor behavior changes with the development of the nervous system. And he posited that advancement in central nervous system triggers appearance of new skills. Okay. Long-lasting belief for maturation theory: basic motor skills emerge automatically. There's no need for special training. Mild deprivation does not arrest development, and the nervous system is the most important. Okay, and again, there's a lot of competing theories on this. Descriptive methodology in motor development, used from the 40s to 70s. Another characteristic of maturational perspective: normative, use of quantitative scores to describe the children's average performance. And sometimes if you read through literature, you'll see these different performance skills, scoring, things like the Eppenschad, Glasgow, and Rarick scales. Biomechanical, use of biomechanical descriptions of movement patterns and fundamental skills, again, Glasgow, Halverson. And again, the way that some of these score, if you look at some of these scores, you'll be like, why do you score, these certain things? And again, some of these have changed over time as well. And again, it changes with our change in information. It changes with our technology and so on and so forth, right? So how would a maturation theorist explain the following? Toddler learning to walk. Again, they're going to say as the body develops, the toddler. Now, again, you're going to have some other theorists, right? So we're just talking about these theories that the body's development determines this, where other theorists are going to say, well, how come some children, even though like based on their growth rate and everything else and their development rate internally, learn to walk at 8 months, where some don't walk until like maybe like 16 months, right? And it's a good question. Right. And again, you may see that within twins, same thing with child riding a bike, teenagers having difficulty swimming. Again, the maturation theories are not complete theories. And again, the way I look at them is they're like a half of the equation, right? Yes, there are certain things that you can't control that are going to mature and change in your body. But yes, there are some things you have control, or your environment or those around you, and not necessarily control. A better word would be influence on why you're able to do those things, right? So again, toddler learning to walk, right? So I've noticed this with all my kids. It seems each kid I had walked earlier than the previous kid. And I think part of that is the environment that they're in. So my oldest daughter would see mom and dad walk, but again, we are always picking her up and so on and so forth, right? The next kid I had was another daughter, and I think she saw her older sister, who was about, not much older than her, walking. And again, this is just theory, I didn't, but when she sees her walking, she sees her doing things, she sees her playing, and she wants to be over there, like around her playing. I feel like there's a desire to do what her sister's doing, right? And I saw that with my next child, who was a boy, and my next child, who was a boy. And it seemed each one of them saw these other kids doing things that whatever they were doing probably looked like things that they would like to do or they wanted to be a part of, and it seemed like each one of them walked a little bit earlier. Okay, now again, there's some of the other development stuff. My oldest child started speaking early. My second oldest, or the second oldest, spoke pretty early. My first son, he was just kind of quiet. Yeah, he didn't speak for a while. And then my next one is a little chatterbox too, so he spoke pretty early, right? And again, so there's a mix. I think if you look at that, there's some developmental things that happen within them, from their biology. There's some developmental things that happen because of what they see, what they observe, what they want to do, desires of things that they want to do, the environment, the like, the positives and negatives, like either encouragement, like, oh yeah, come on, do that, or don't do that, and so on and so forth. So again, we see that throughout all these things. A child riding a bike. My oldest son, who's the third kid now, he started riding a bike the earliest, and the reason he did is he saw kids riding dirt bikes, and he wanted a dirt bike. And so I told him, I said, well, you can't ride a dirt bike until you can ride a bicycle. And the kid was determined to learn how to ride a bicycle, and what fear of falling that most kids had, he just put aside. And every time he fell, he just brushed it off because he wanted to ride a dirt bike so bad. And this was when he was 3, and he was able to actually start riding a dirt bike soon after that, when he was 3 as well. So yeah, and with my other kids, the desire's not, it wasn't necessarily as big, right? And again, they've all been, you know grown up in the same home, and everything else, and so they all learn to do things at different times, and I've been able to observe this, right? But yeah, I do think that there is some truth to maturation, but it's not the complete, it's not a complete signed, sealed, delivered type of process, right? Information processing perspective, motor development is driven by external processes, so nurture. So again, I do believe this, as I do believe the other one, but again, I think there's a percentage of those things, right? So it says basic tenet: the brain acts like a computer. Passive human responds to stimuli in the environment. Important concepts: input, encoding, processing, and feedback. And young adults are often studied first as a basis of comparison for performance of children and older adults. So again, this goes back to the other part. So the nurture, right? So again, your external processes. So like I said, my son wanted to ride a dirt bike. So he learned how to ride his bicycle at a much younger age than his 2 older sisters. His younger brother is kind of on track. And again, it's that same thing. He sees the older ones riding bikes. He wants to ride a bike. We'll see. He's doing the training wheel thing now. If I can get him off of training wheels here in the next couple months, he'll be probably pretty close to on par with what his brother, about the time his brother was able to ride a bike. But again, his maturity and paying attention and things like that is a little bit different than where his brother was. So we'll see. With that, and so again, I think that has to do with the nurture part of it, right? Because he's definitely coordinated enough. Now this is the brain processing thing of learning the skills and so on and so forth, of being able to, you know, dictate where your bike's going to go because you're looking where you need to go and things like that. He tends to like to look around and wander a lot. So he scares me a bit in taking the wheels off because I don't think he's at that mature level where he's going to pay attention where he's going. Perceptual motor development. Subfield exists within the framework of information processing. Early work in the 1960s trying to link learning disabilities to delayed perceptual motor development. So again, this would be, that, hey, the person's not getting what they're supposed to be getting. You know, like they're not seeing what they're supposed to be seeing. It's not processing the way it should be, so on and so forth. Where again, some learning disabilities, you know, there's a whole spectrum of them, even within, just like if we look at like autism, which autism doesn't necessarily mean somebody has a learning disability, but it can, right? So, we always talk about autism as a spectrum. And again, um, there's probably more, I bet, I would venture to guess, if we ever get to a point where we completely understand autism, there's, at this point in time, I would say, in my opinion, there's probably less that we know about it than what we do know about it, in all honesty. And the reason I say that is because, when you look at it, and you look at the spectrum, and you look how wide the spectrum is, from folks that they call like high functioning, like, they may have like some things like little quirks, so to speak, but all in all, they function well in society. They function fine in society. With little to zero help, where you have some folks that are, will always need care their entire life, right? And who knows, even maybe in 5 to 10 years, they may start having, like different categories where it's like certain folks aren't even necessarily autistic. They have something else as we learn more, and so on and so forth, right? So, just understanding that, that there's so little that we know about it, it's really hard to say it's just a delayed perceptual motor development. In some cases, yes. In other cases, there may be more biological, neurological, physiological, barriers that persisted in their DNA that keep folks from doing that, versus other ones that the barriers may be very slight, or maybe non-existent, and they're having difficulties for, um, other reasons, right? And so again, like I said, these are all theoretical, and it's always good to question these. When you go and you hear people speak, it's always good to ask questions. Don't be one of those people that's at a conference that's trying to necessarily prove somebody wrong and be a jerk about something. Always ask good questions. Be respectful. I've seen that at conferences where people try to attack the speaker. And again, I've been at conferences where I completely disagree with what somebody's saying, but you can, I mean, best thing to do is ask good questions, be respectful. Sometimes when you ask a question, sometimes the person that's up there speaking, who tries to put themselves as their a know-it-all expert, will sometimes secede to a point and say, that's something I never really thought about, or yeah, this good, hey, I mean, you kind of got through to somebody that is quote unquote expert in their field, right? And so again, if you ever go to those, like I said, it's good to hear a lot of different perspectives, especially in these things, because we don't have the total picture yet, right? So again, information processing is going to say, like why a toddler learns to walk, or when they learn to walk, and all that, and riding the bike, and having difficulty swimming. All those are going to happen because of, their processing. So again, we're looking at, if you really look at everything in here, we're looking at, you have pure genetic, we have the environment somebody grows up in, and then we just have how somebody processes things, right? And really, what you guys should understand is all three of those are true, and all three of those are false if you want to look at them as they are the end all be all. Like if you're going to take one and say this one and you're going to roll with that one, no. It's the same thing I tell you guys when it comes to, fitness and nutrition and all that. You have folks that are big of, they're big into hormones, right? It's hormone, 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 but they don't really think about the physiology of the muscle itself. They don't think about the nutrition that goes into feeding those muscles and rebuilding those muscles. They're just hormone, hormone, hormone. On the other hand, you have folks that don't think about the hormones. They think about just the physiology part, right? They think about the feeding. They think about the nutrients that are needed to build the muscles bigger or stronger and things like that, and then we don't think about the genetics, right? Some folks have a higher fiber count and they have a different hormonal set, right? So they're looking at like both of those things, and then but they may be forgetting about the nutritional concept. So again, if you exclude any one of those things, you're not going to help somebody to achieve their best version of their athletic self, so to speak, right? If you're just going to focus on one aspect, you're missing out on other things, and then we're not even looking at the biomechanics of their movements, right? So the safety of keeping them healthy, or what's going to maximize certain muscle recruitment by the way that they move, right? And that's the thing is, when you get into our fields, and again here, the motor learning, how do you teach it to them, right? So again, understanding there's three concepts in here with, okay, well, how do we get them to learn to do that movement, which is going to help them to be a better football player, soccer player, whatever else, right? There's so many different theories. There's so many different sciences that all work interactively, and you guys need to be very good at recognizing all of them somewhat simultaneously. And that's where we get these crackpot diets. We get these weird fitness programs that are these end-all be-alls, because people are like, oh yeah, I understand this one little tiny concept and we're going to run with it, right? And they forget they forget, not that they forget about everything else, they just deny anything else, right? So again, you guys need to be very, very cognizant of all the things that go into our profession and what we're doing. Okay, and again, here's this is a great chapter on the fact that here's three different things just to be cognizant of, right? Ecological perspective: development is driven by the interrelationship of individual, environment, and task, right? So again, this kind of starts bringing things together, right? So the neural system is one of many neural system is one of many responsible for action. Hey, how that's written. Basically, it's saying it's one of the systems that's responsible for action. Okay, one of many, right? So you have dynamic systems and perception action. Okay. And again, if you think about it, you've got, the individual, right? So, again, I'm teach all my kids to ride their bikes, right? So my oldest daughter was not, she wasn't like super, super interested, but she was interested, right? So we got her riding without training wheels. I think she was probably like, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 6. And again, it was like, it was there, but it was more, it was more I was interested because there was other kids her age that had already been riding without training wheels for a while. And I'm like, okay, maybe it's time to get the training wheels off, right? But her fear of falling kind of superseded her desire to maybe not have training wheels. And it was kind of the same with her sister. Her sister had a little bit more desire because her older sister didn't have training wheels, right? And so she had a bit more desire because once she saw she had her wheels off for a while and she's riding without the little wheels, she's kind of like, okay, right? And then my son, like I said, his individual desire was he wanted to ride dirt bikes, right? Again, the environment played into that. So my older daughter really didn't have anybody to model after other than her mom and dad riding bikes or whatever. And at the time, I don't even think my wife had a bike. I would go ride my bike sometimes. And so her environment was different than her little sister's. Her little sister has an older sister that she sees on a bike without training wheels. My older son is he's several years younger than the 2 older sisters, so it's not like he's ever really trying to compete with them. They're kind of in a whole different category for him. But the environment he lived in is there's a little boy down the street who was about his age, he saw one day riding a dirt bike, and he thought that was the coolest thing, right? So environment played into his individual, and then the task, right? So again, to him, the task wasn't something he saw it and he's like, wow, that's amazing. I don't think I can do that. It was something that he felt that he was equipped to do that task, right? So it had an importance, it had a measure of, he had confidence that he felt he could master that, so on and so forth. So again, that's the thing where, like my oldest daughter, the task wasn't necessarily as important. She was a little bit more fearful or doubtful of her ability to master the task. It was a bit more imposing, so it took a little bit longer to get her going from training wheels to without training wheels, right? And so you look at these combinations, and again, I'm speculating a bit on some of these things just based on, like knowing my kids and things like that. I may be slightly off, with all those things, but again, definitely that all those things play into it, and when I look back, I'm like, okay, well, this could have had, and again, whatever the percentage each one's plays into it, I don't know, right? That's all speculation. Okay. So dynamic systems theory was advocated in the early 1980s by Kugler, Kelso, and Turvey. The body system spontaneously self-organize, not driven solely by the CNS. And body systems, the performer's environment and task demands interact. Or I would say they probably should say interactions, but I guess they're saying the task demands, all those things interact. It's weird how it's written. It kind of has a weird flow to it, but because so your body systems, the environment they're in, and their task demands all interact together, which again is what we're looking at the beginning, right? So some systems, these are your rate limiting systems, may develop more slowly in young or degrade faster in the old, and thus control rate of development or change. So again, let's take for instance, I made this comment yesterday about girls and boys of the same age. So if you take like 5 or 6 year old girls and boys, 5 or 6 year old girls tend to be more I'd say mentally mature, or they have a better cognitive span to where you can hold their attention, right? And so at that age, like if you were going to teach them how to play baseball, so to speak. And again, it doesn't hold true across the board 100%. You're going to have some of those boys that when you're talking to them, they're going to pay very good attention. Everything you say, they're going to absorb it like a sponge. But if I put them, like if I sat there and gave them like a really good baseball camp for a week, right? On average, you're probably going to have more, like if I put them all out in the outfield waiting to catch pop flies, I would probably have more boys at that age out there chasing butterflies and looking for worms and digging in the dirt than probably the girls. And again, part of that is the rate limiter, that their attention spans on average tend to be less in the male brain at that point versus the female brain. And again, it has to do with the rate of maturation. And again, those things kind of ebb and flow and change over time. Like pre-puberty, at puberty, and post-puberty, and all those things. We see some, again, it's not, like I said, it's not 100%. There's some, some of y'all probably know some girls that were very, very immature compared to everybody in their class at certain ages. There's some boys that were much more mature than all the boys and girls. I know people a lot of times get up in arms about like making sexual difference and categorizing. But again, the reason we do this is because when we observe these things, or anybody that's done research on them, they'll be like, hey, out of 100 kids, 80% of the boys were this way, 80% of the girls, or 75 or whatever. So we're going with percentage averages, right? And again, that's why I always tell you guys, you treat an individual as an individual. But again, when you're, if you've worked with, say a 6-year-old girl teaching her sports, and you're like, man, she's picking these things up so quick. And then you work with more 6-year-old girls, and in general that happens. Then you work with your first boy, you're like, why is this so different? Well, part of it may just be their attention span, right? And so again, understanding that hey, we've got to pick tasks that are more associated with the maturity of their mind at that time, and their attention span can help you to be more successful in getting them where you're trying to get them. Like if you're teaching them sports skills, or so to speak, right? So again, rate limiting factors. Again, it could be, you have things such as, like motor development. Rate limiting factors could be, whether it's in the mind, the nerves. You could have some muscular rate limiting factors. You could have kids going through growth spurts. Can become rate limiting factors. Kids that haven't gone through growth spurts could be rate. It just depends on what you're trying to help them do, right? Um, so development is characterized by qualitative and discontinuous change. So again, at some point, um, you know, there's certain things that you know, there's certain things that are always changing constantly. There's certain things that change for a bit and then somewhat stop and then pick back up. And it'll occur across the lifespan, right? And so the change, when they say discontinuous, there's always continuous change, but there's certain things that uh, you know you look at something like your height, right? You don't grow your entire lifespan, right? I mean, you get to your height, right? And so there are some things that are discontinuous. That doesn't mean that there aren't other changes that go on past that point, right? um, so dynamic systems graphing change. So these are, different systems that they're saying, like some things are, like they don't change over time, other things will change, or other things will be stagnant. So if you look at system 2, all of a sudden there's a movement, then now it stays the same at that point. There's system 3 where it's like, you got no change, then there's continuous growth. It's not like a straight up shot, but it happens over time, a little bit slower than in system 2. Then you get to the point where you don't change anymore. um, System 4, a little bit more complex, where it's like no change, slower time change than system 2, then no change, slower time change again, then no change. And then we've got the other graph, which is basically saying there's times of change, there's times there's not changing, but it's always moving, right? And again, you could make an argument for any one of those systems, the 4 systems. If you look at the 5th bigger graph, probably holds the most truth. Perception action theory is based on the work of Gibson, 1960s and 70s. Action is not only a response to perception, but actions generate perception, and the link between them is strengthened. Right. So it's basically this full loop system. Right. So you see something, you want to do it, you try it. Right. If you try it with reasonable success, then you want to now do more of it. Okay. Right. And so you dig in deeper and learn how to do it better. You gain greater skills at it. Sometimes, when somebody tries something and say they get hurt or something, there's a negative reaction, which then makes them more hesitant to try it again. Right. And so again, that's where, like if we go back to the learning to ride a bike, there's some of y'all had some nasty falls when you're first learning to ride a bike, and like you're like, no, I'm done, I ain't doing this. But if you had persistent parents, they're like, no, you're gonna learn. And so even though you got bleeding knees and elbows, you finally got back on. Other kids would get on a bike and they get that feeling of like they're balancing, they're good. They might just have a little tiny fall, which wasn't that bad. And they're like, oh yeah, I want to get back up and get riding again, right? Different experiences, right? So, different amounts of success. And again, also the desire, like, do you really desire to ride a bike, or is it just something like, it's like, well, yeah, I kind of want to be able to do it because other kids my age can do it, but you know, it's not that cool, you know, where there's other kids that are like, no, I gotta, you know, when I was a little kid, you know, I had a little BMX bike, and across from where I grew up was a dead space of dirt and stuff. And I remember seeing some older kids build some jumps over there, and they'd ride their bikes and jump. And you know, I'd see this from my front window and kept, you know, couldn't wait till I was going to have a bike, and go over and do it. Right. So again, had this strong desire to want to be on a bike and master a bike and do things on that bike because it looked like what they were doing was incredibly awesome. Right. And so again, that, you know, that played into my bike riding. You know, and my desire to overcome the fact that I was one of those kids, had some nasty falls when I was first learning, you know, and again, you know, just wanting to get over that. So again, it is that, I mean, that's really what it is. And so, you know, as you master skills, it strengthens this perception to do more action, right? Affordance is the function of an environmental object provides to the individual. So the characteristics define object's meaning. Object functions are based on the individual's intrinsic dimensions, you know, for example, body scaled rather than the object's extrinsic objective dimensions, right? Ecological perspective, both branches reject the CNS as executive controller of nearly limitless opportunities for movement. Again, just because your nerves can tell your body to do it doesn't mean your body's going to do it, right? There's a lot of other things that go into that. Okay. Control is distributed throughout the body at both global and local levels, right? Again, you've got to look at things. Your nervous system can be, you could have a superior CNS system, but you could have muscular issues, or you know, you could have injuries that create impairments, you know, whatever it is, right? So that's kind of like, if you're, you know, trying to digest this slide, think of it in that realm, right? So again, that's kind of what they're saying, right? Again, challenging perspectives allows for new types of experiments, new ways of thinking about old questions. So again, questions to think about: how would ecological perspective theorists explain the following? So again, going back to all those, I think we kind of hit. Current interest, the role of motor skill development in good health is a recent interest. Again, you know, what it's interesting to see, especially when you have healthy, like if you have healthy individuals all around the same age, and you look at different things and their ability to develop certain motor skills. You know, again, sometimes we see patterns, sometimes we don't. And again, it's just really, it's amazing. You know, this is one of those sciences that's very I love motor development or motor learning, motor control, you know, like depending on what class you take that's in this realm. Um, because it has such a good mix of, you know, like neuro, psychology, physiology, biomechanic, you know, like it's a really cool realm of how all these things interact. You know, and again, it's crazy. You could do some really good research and you may have some trouble at certain age ranges, especially like you know, if you have a lot of similarities in some folks, like, okay, these are all relatively healthy people around the same age, so on and so forth, and you put them through certain tasks, and again, you could get a lot of varying degrees of aptitude on those particular tests that you did. You know, which then causes, you know, statistically, you know, this is why statistics, you know, those of you that hated statistics, you know, you're like, well, why does it have to be so complicated? Why can't we just do means, medians, and average, you know, like, or mean, median, and mode, you know, like, why can't we just use it that simplistic? And this is why, because if we're looking for things that have similarities or things that have differences, sometimes everything's different. Or if you like widen your scope too much, everything looks the same, right? Because, you know, individually they all performed way different. So then you're like, okay, well, that's all very similar. Everybody's very different. Well, yeah, but these folks all kind of moved right. These folks all kind of moved left or something like that, you know, so, you know, to varying degrees. So again, there's so much to learn in this, and there's so much to speculate when you see things, right? And it's completely interesting, and there's so much that we, you know, there's a lot that we know, but so much more that we don't, right? Skill proficiency enhances exercise. Exercise assists individuals in maintain ideal body weight. Again, you know, this is one of the things that really drives people. Like, you know, like a lot of times people are like, well, why won't people exercise? Man, some people just feel inadequate, right? The fact that they're goofy in their movements, you know, like they feel odd, or they feel that they look odd when they're doing things, or they can't do it right, will become a psychological deterrent from them doing certain things, right? You know, you ever got excited about something and you try to get one of your friends, hey, look, you know, like, hey, I learned how to do a handstand. You want to try? And they try it and they fall on their face, and then that's it. They're done. They're not going to do it anymore, right? You know, and again, it's because they were so like they had no proficiency at it. They failed miserably. They don't want to learn it, right? And that happens, right? And so skill proficiency is important, and understanding how to teach skill proficiency is very important to you guys as practitioners. And here's the, you know, that's the good bit of this. Here's the part you don't want to hear. There's no right way to teach somebody like certain movements, to be honest. You know, like, again, there's little tools, there's little tricks, there's little things like that have been passed down from generations. And so, you know, a lot of times they may work, you know, like they may work for a majority of folks, but they don't work for everybody, right? You know, I always give this example to you guys when we're in like the strength conditioning course or the exercise leadership courses, is teaching the squat. um, I know several different approaches to teach somebody how to squat. And the reason I know all these approaches is because the approach that taught me how to do it mechanically correct worked for me. And the guy that taught me how to do it, you know, like he was, you know, like I'd had several people before try to get me, you know, and again, the methods were making it more awkward or weird. And then, you know, the one guy taught me, and I was like, oh, okay, you know, like I got it, you know, I get it, I got it. Now the approach he used on me was a good mix of picturing what my body was doing, understanding the hinge principles at my knees and hips mostly is where I was focusing, and then some visual cues to look at. And that worked for me. You know, and again, um, he taught me from a sitting position up, where people used to teach me from standing to sitting. The standing to sitting just, it didn't work for me at the time. Right now, again, I know folks that I've tried to do the sitting to standing position stuff, and it doesn't work. And so I sometimes will go to back to almost what somebody else was teaching me before that didn't work on me. And sometimes that works, right? So again, you know, those are things that happen, right? Son et al. Model involving skill competence, activity, physical fitness, and weight status have generated new research. Again, one of the things we're always researching, like I said, even when more research comes out, we're always, here's a concept I'm going to tell you. We're never going to come up with the correct formula for weight loss. We're never going to come up with the correct formula for, you know, building your body bigger, stronger, faster. Yeah, you know, there's not going to be like a one size fits all, is what I'm trying to get at. There are certain principles that hold truth, but in those, everything you do when working with an individual will be individualistic, right? It's not a copy paste type of, you know, we're not in a copy paste type of environment, right? Um, Summary and synthesis: different theoretical perspectives of motor development have emerged over time. Although each perspective is unique, there are often benefits to viewing motor development from different perspectives. Exactly what I was telling you guys before, right? Like, take it all in, you know, and use something from each thing that will help you be a better practitioner. Maturational perspective has had a lasting impact on how changes in motor development occur. However, the ecological perspective is now more widely used by researchers. All right, guys, that's it for chapter 2. If you have any questions, email me, text me, write me on Blackboard, and I'll be happy to answer them. Is it gonna let me? There we go. All right. Now are you gonna let me stop recording?